Good afternoon. I would like to call to order the May 4th, 2026 Lake Washington School Board Study Session. Let the record reflect that all board members are present and we have one of our student reps, Suniri. We have one topic on the agenda tonight, and that is 2026-27 Board Work Plan Development. Dr. Holman.
Well, I'm glad you're handing it off to me since I just said I might be underwhelmingly underprepared. Maybe we should have written the script differently and handed it off to Vice President La Liberty in that moment. In the board's online diligent community folder, you'll have I'll call it a shell instead of a skeleton, because outline for a work plan next year. And what we did in Cabinet today was just kind of walk through the monitoring process, the progress monitoring that occurred this year. We attempted to move monitoring up as early as possible. We queried Tim to make sure that some of our moves didn't then make some data unavailable. And so that might be a good place to start, and just kind of walking through Cabinet's feedback. We also then included a few kind of key topics that we felt would be important to be on the board's work plan next year, boundary, and then kind of early spring, just an update on the two curricula that the board recently approved, both elementary literacy and secondary math. And so while you're pulling that up, I will screen share so that we can walk through that together.
Yeah, and just while you're pulling this up, I always find it helpful to look at this and sort of see where the holes are in our work plan. It's kind of funny once we plug in our sort of required work that we have to do. There are not actually many holes left. That does sort of take up quite a bit, especially of the first half of the year, the first half of the school year, that is. So like through winter break. And so then that sort of scopes what we've got to play with in terms of, I know many board directors filled out the survey to think about sort of some of their areas of interest, and thinking about where how we want the remaining time to go. And then, of course, too, thinking about some of the feedback that we got from our students a few weeks ago, and thinking about where we might emphasize student engagement in some different ways. That was one of the takeaways from the student board rep study session we had a few weeks ago.
Another conversation we had this morning in Cabinet was, how do we continue to evolve the boards, and I think specifically, and Cabinet members chime in if I'm not referencing this correctly, but specifically the operational expectation monitoring. It's like, what's kind of the next turn of the wheel? And primarily when we think about OE3 for next year, being really intentional about what that looks like, because just coming and presenting charts and tables to the board will never elevate to really the values piece that the board has put forward. And so that's probably the easiest example, but bringing our innovation pilot sites in really as the primary example, but doing so in a study session so that we can dig really deep into what was the work, what did our schools learn, and then, how did that change practice in our schools? Doesn't mean that the monitoring report will change. The board will still have that, but that we'll think about how do we do this a little bit, maybe differently, but also deeper. Another example, historically, we've monitored OE12 and OE13, so technology and facilities on the same night. We would monitor, but we would also have a program update. So Brian Buck would come and present, and our technology services group would come and present, and they were disconnected. Well, they're actually the same thing. And if we're more intentional about our storytelling in these areas and really intentionally connecting to the board's policies, we think that actually might be a more relevant way of monitoring, so that the board is hearing the stories and the articulation of how are the values actually being applied within these settings, as opposed to just really talking through charts, graphs, and data. And so that's kind of what we're thinking about, and maybe that's not true for every OE. I mean, I'm sure Barbara would love to articulate the budget process in story format, but so some are definitely primed to be monitored that way, and so that's something we were talking about. Any comments from cabinet members? I captured our conversation well. Okay.
I was thinking about the experience this year of, I think it happened twice, maybe just once for the R2 progress monitoring, where we had a study session on math right before we did R2 progress monitoring. And I think that's that same kind of linking, like we're talking, Dr. Holman's talking about OEs, but that same sort of like, what's the deeper contextual background that then gives a little bit more meaning to the actual monitoring report.
And we spent that much time talking about monitoring because it is a heavy impact in the board's work plan for the year. And knowing that in a coherent governance model, policy really is the work of the board, and rigorous monitoring and evaluation of the superintendent and system is critical. And we also know that presenting the same data sets year after year without context probably doesn't lead to the board truly understanding what it looks like in action. So happy to take comments or questions about that as just kind of a set for the conversation.
Director Yoakum?
Thank you. I really appreciate that way of looking at this. And I'm just wondering, is it helpful for us to hear which OEs you're thinking about monitoring this way before we dive into this? Or are you going to kind of go through that as we move through the plan?
I would say primarily the OEs that aren't primed for that would be OE2, 5, 6, 7, 8. The others, and I think, you know, what's shared might look different from OE11 versus OE9 versus, and so they all might look a little bit different. But I think just telling the story, I think our community would also connect with that probably at a deeper level. Not that they don't love hearing me say OE 6.2 says, and then, you know, because we do have community that pay attention. And I think they would appreciate hearing how this plays out.
One other thing I did want to bring back to, I sort of was looking through lots of different notes I've taken over the course of the year and found lots of places where I was like, let's make sure to bring this back during work plan development. And one thing on this topic, which I think came from Director Richter, but correct me if I'm wrong here, was around the timing of monitoring conversations as well. So right now, for most of our monitoring reports, it's a 2-meeting process. We have some sort of presentation at one meeting, and then we also have the board's discussion consideration of the monitoring report and the board action to approve the monitoring report. That's all one meeting. And then we come back typically at the next meeting with the board summary and have time for discussion, so on around that. I think, and well, anyway, I have notes with no name attached, but there was some discussion of should we split that up more. I think the thinking being that right now it can look like, to Dr. Holman's point about when community is watching, that the board just sort of is like, okay, well, here's the day that we're talking about the instructional program, the one day a year. And it looks a little performative of, you know, we get this presentation and then it seems like without much time to think about it, we just consider and then we approve. I think we know that that's not actually how it goes, and that, for example, we're talking about the instructional program probably at just about every meeting and so on. But just thinking, also if community has input, how does it feel to community if they watch this presentation and all of a sudden, a couple hours later, the report is approved. So I just wanted to bring that back into the room. It does influence the work plan, because if we were to split those things up, that would need to be reflected in the work plan. We would have to structure this differently from how it's structured now. So wanted to throw that out there for discussion. Yeah, Director Mikoff.
I totally agree with you, and that's a conversation Director, that we've had before. I do think that the perception is not what's actually happening, but I think that community participation is really important. And I think when we're talking about public comment and participation, that does give people time to do that as well.
I'm just want to make sure I'm following. Split it up in, like, what are some ideas? Could you give me like some examples of what it would look like to split it up, just like in practice, potential examples?
I think, and anybody else can jump in here if I'm getting any of this wrong, please. But it would be the same work that we do right now. So there would still be some sort of presentation, and we can talk about different formats for that and so on. But some sort of staff saying, here's the work that's been done, here's the story we want to tell, here's the numbers that we want to show, whatever they might be. So that would all happen in one board meeting. But then rather than proceeding straight from that conversation into motion to typically approve the monitoring report as presented and board discussion, that piece would happen at the next meeting. And then the board summary would follow on from that.
Okay, I understand.
Okay, Director Yoakum.
In conversations with PTSA leadership, PTSA council, some of the thoughts that they have brought were, is it possible to provide more information prior to those first meetings that we have? So there's time for them to provide feedback prior to when we're monitoring. And then, so kind of keeping the same schedule we have, but somehow rather than the Friday before, like letting the community see this, 2 weeks before. So after an agenda setting meeting, at least this is the topic, or kind of here are the big questions we have for the community, or here are, it doesn't have to be the whole report, but more of, if there's feedback that people want to give, it would be really helpful to receive it in this context, right? That was just another potential formatting way of doing it.
I'm not actually sure that I did. So maybe, can I restate what I understand? It would be like we would have, so it would be like a three meeting process as opposed to the two that we have now. Is that right? So meeting one would be before the meeting. The report would be provided to the board, and then at that meeting there would be whatever staff presentation there was. There would be the opportunity for the board to ask questions, I suppose, right? Of course, clarifying questions. And then at the meeting that follows that, 2 weeks later, the board would take action to approve the monitoring report as presented, or with whatever changes. And then the meeting following that, the board would take action on its written summary.
Exactly. So maybe to give an example, I'm just looking at, so for example, right now we have R3 as September 14th board meeting, and then R3 summary would come back at the October 5th board meeting. What that would probably look like instead is September 14th would be the start of that process. So the presentation, however that's going, yes, time for board to ask questions. Then October 5th would become the consideration of that report, so board action to accept that report. Probably a shorter conversation, although we can, sometimes our discussions go quite a ways. And then we would come back on October 19th with the board summary. So it would, I think we would keep the monitoring sort of as is. And I do want to make sure too that we're getting staff input here on if this is I don't think it would be an impact. It's actually more spreading out the board's work over 2 meetings, but if you're seeing anything that would jump out as, oh, wow, that would really change our rhythm of work, then please bring that forward.
Well, I was just going to point that out to my team. It really, if you think about who's owning the content, it really is staff, board. And so the board is just choosing not to dialogue amongst yourselves at the meeting. You're postponing it for 2 weeks. I don't think, I think the only new pattern is just that things are hanging on for longer on agendas. But if, let's just say you allocate the same amount of time for all of these things, it's not adding, it's just spreading time out, possibly.
I mean, I think it probably is adding time. I'm assuming. I mean, I don't know. I think a like. Well, let me ask this. So, I hadn't thought about this until today. What is the interest that we're trying to accomplish by doing this? I mean, I could come up with a few, but like, what are other people's thoughts?
Director Yocum?
I would think that it would allow for community to provide input after seeing a presentation, because I think a lot of people will see a presentation or review it afterwards and then be able to share input. I also think that for me, like, I can look through a presentation, I can look through the monitoring report, but then after asking questions, I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about, and maybe trying to make decisions on how to, our discussion, and like, maybe are there things we want to change or that we want to add into our summary. I like taking time to reflect on that. And I think having had that conversation and listening and having questions answered, that for me personally could give me additional time to reflect prior to coming back prepared for a better discussion with all 5 of us. That's just the benefit I see. But I do see it prolonging, and I think that is the added, like, well, now I have to keep that in my head, but then now I have to keep the next one in my head because we're probably so that to me is the downfall of it. So it's
Yeah, so again, walking through that schedule, if R3 now is spread over 3 meetings, now we're coming back on October 5th, we're approving the R3 monitoring report, and then we're also piling on OE12 and OE13 monitoring. And then when we come back on October 19th, and R2 monitoring, thank you, yes. And then now when we come back on October 19th, we are going to pile on the OE14 presentation, and we're also holding R3, at this point it'll be at the board summary stage, and then R2, OE12, and OE13 would all be at that sort of monitoring report consideration approval stage. So that is how that would play out. Director Richter.
Just from a technical standpoint, sometimes we also, there's 2 lines in a presentation that are swapped, or, there's just something in the monitoring report. It's not that we're unhappy with the content, but there's just a typo. Yeah. Or sometimes, lines left out, things happen. And I could see us asking staff to just fix that. And then I think what you're just saying is it does add extra time. And I am thinking with it's been 4 extra months of doing this now. I'm like, yes, that would be a downside for sure. I do think that community looks at us looking at a monitoring report and then going, yes, everything here, we're just going to accept it the way it was presented and sign off on it within 30 minutes to an hour. It feels very performative sometimes. On the other hand, do we really want to have a big discussion about it? Because we do discussion, comments, questions, and then again in 2 weeks, just sign off on it without changes. I don't think that's it either. So maybe it's we have the discussion, we have the comments, we have the questions, and maybe if we have very specific asks for staff and Dr. Holman, that we make them, but otherwise, we're kind of assuming the next time we're going to bring it back and have a version then that we want to pass. But I grant that that all adds time and effort. So I'm just throwing this out. I think my real point is that there might technically be small things that we could tweak in this way that might be good to have in our signed documents very accurately. So.
Director Liberty.
So, two things. First, conclusion. In general, I think I'm supportive of this idea, of the idea of doing this, and I do think this will end up adding more time for staff. What's the work expands to fit the time, right? I mean, that just happens. The board will probably on a regular or at least semi-current basis ask for tweaks to the report that will come back to staff. And I would imagine there'll be even instances where staff will have to provide a supplemental presentation at the next meeting. I can see that happening. So John, I think you should be somewhat mindful of that there will be some mission creep here. This will increase work. And this will increase work for the board. And that will either mean longer meetings or less that the board does. And so I do think there will be a trade-off there. I think that the board's highest leverage time is spent on monitoring, on results in particular, but also on the OEs. So I am comfortable doing this. And I just think we should all think about that before leaping in. And last thought, we can abandon the idea too. That can happen if it's not working after the first few. You can change your mind. I think it's allowed.
Deputy Superintendent Gillingham.
Thanks. I'm just noticing in the conversation, I think we're sometimes conflating two different specific acts that Dr. Holman or staff provide, which is you have the monitoring report, which is actually what the board is taking formal action on, and then a presentation is informative, but not the thing that the board's actually taking action on. So that document, I believe, would be the thing that you're taking action on, and what Dr. Holman had suggested earlier is that the presentation provides an illustration of an example of how we're operating within the alignment with the values that the board has articulated, but that the presentation does not supplant or the monitoring report stands on its own. At one point in time, there was some discussion about having the monitoring reports in advance, like further a week or two in advance of that first. We've worked, the work plan here reflects really probably the earliest date that we're able to schedule most of these. So that would be just a consideration if that's an interest to essentially have a published monitoring report in advance before kind of it being out with, on a board meeting schedule. That would impact where essentially would shove things further back in the calendar rather than forward, because most of that data is, we've over several years have worked to actually move it up as quickly as we can, and we probably have it about as refined and as lean as we can to get data just in time. But that also means that staff doesn't have a whole lot of time with that data to then be able to prepare it. So.
Yes, and that is a good call out, that really we're doing three things on one day right now, which is the presentation, some sort of program update presentation, something that's separate from the monitoring report. And then there's the actual monitoring report presentation. Sometimes those are kind of conflated, or there's just no separate presentation, but sometimes they're not. And so when we're thinking of, and then, sorry, the third piece that we're doing all in the same meeting then is the board action. So if we're thinking about splitting things up, I think it's a good point that we probably want to keep the staff work in one meeting. And I think to your point too, I would see the board's summaries moving out. So the board's work, if we wanted to extend it, would push out, not pushing any of the staff work earlier. I think that's a really important call out, because yes, this is I mean, being able to now to monitor R2 and be seeing SBA data from May in October, like we really can't compress that any further than we already have. Yeah, Director Yoakum.
I really appreciate you saying that because I'm thinking back to Deputy Superintendent Ortega. Ortega! I was trying so hard. I'm thinking back to Pablo's presentation and how it was very different than what we had previously, where I do think we were linking that presentation to monitoring because so much of it was like that. And if it's going to start to, the presentations are going to look a little bit different, then I can see that. That was a really good call out. I do appreciate that. And I also appreciate Director LaLiberty's comment on we can always, and I don't know, like, can we say, yeah, let's try this, and then after R3 being the first one, like, abandon ship? Like, can we do that, or is that going to cause more problems, I guess, to a work plan that's already set in place?
Well, the board's policies would allow us to move things around as long as we're not eliminating something from the work plan. Yes.
I mean, we can eliminate, it just requires a vote of the board, so that would require a little bit of, more lead time.
Thank you.
We could also, just to throw out another idea, is this might be more important for some of the more in-depth policies. So we could say, hey, maybe this year we try this with, let's say like we could see even like R3 OE14, which would then eliminate that, that meeting where we're basically looking at R3, R2, and OE14 in different capacities all at once. And we could see how it goes. These are all options that I am just throwing out for conversation.
I will also say I think it would be difficult to increase the workload of monitoring on staff. I mean, because right now it's a heavy lift to put all of this together, including presentations. And so if there's a thought that the 3 meetings is going to also come with asks of staff to come back to the second meeting and present new, different, or updated information, I just don't see that being a viable process. So I hadn't thought of that.
Director Richter.
I mean, personally, if we had a staff presentation and we had the initial discussion of the monitoring report, and then another meeting that was requested changes to the monitoring report, I'm not expecting a whole new slide deck. I'm not expecting a lot of, I'm not trying to ask a lot of staff. I mean, I'm just thinking someone standing up and like, yes, we changed this. You asked us, we brought this in. If we start asking for entirely new sets of data, et cetera, then yeah, I see your point.
So it sounds, I think I'm hearing some interest in trying this. And I should have started to with, we can discuss tonight, but this is very much just a, what did you say? Not skeleton. A shell, thank you, of the work plan. So maybe, and we will then fill out the shell and bring that back at a future board meeting for further discussion. So I think my takeaway here is, as we're sort of fleshing things out, that there is some board interest in separating this out and bringing back a draft that shows this for some or all policies. And I think that's a reasonable direction for tonight.
Agreed.
Okay. And sorry, I cut off maybe a little bit of the conversation around the storytelling aspects and so on of monitoring. It does also sound, though, like there is seems like a direction that the board is interested in seeing monitoring taking, and so that we can continue to look at what that actually means in practice. But that's yes, that's an interest and something to continue looking at.
I also hear an interest from the board that community is informed about what the board is going to be discussing. And there's a couple ways to do that. One, we could get everything done, 2 to 3 weeks early and have it publicly available. I would say additionally, we could almost indicate, and this would be something if we added to the publication we do after board meetings. At the next board meeting, the board will be monitoring this policy. Here's last year's report. If you want to preview what was presented to the board last year, the board receives this report 10 days prior to the board meeting. Do you know what and so some process, some pointing back in history as to what's been done previously, so that people can, if they want to be informed, if they want to comment, it would just kind of keep folks up to date, maybe differently than we do now. And I know it's all in the work plan, but I think just continually sharing with people like what's up ahead.
Director Meekhoff.
I really like that idea because I keep bringing up not overwhelming people with information, and if we have it in something that's already exists rather than one more email. But I think wrapping it up in a package rather than just having these standalone, this is what happened last time, this is where we're headed, I think would be really helpful.
And it's also another way for the board to point people to a place. How do I know? Well, you can also get updates about our board meetings, and there's a place to sign up. It happens on a consistent basis. We get it out, I think, on Tuesday all but one time since we started that process, and I think that was my fault. So, but no, truly, it's a very consistent thing that goes out, and I think that would be a good add to kind of preview what's coming down the pike.
And I think, too, spreading things out, this looks a little bit different from explicitly what PTA asked, but also that just having, because I know we've gotten some emails after a board meeting where we did approve a monitoring report saying, oh, but I had this input. And I think it doesn't, that input comes out of having access to the monitoring report and also watching the presentation. So having those be separated, because right now we kind of have to be like, well, we already approved it. And, in most cases, we were aware of that, or there was not a big surprise or anything like that. We could work through if there ever was just, something that we weren't aware of. But just separating that out a little bit so that it's not like, it doesn't feel quite as final to community. Yeah, Director Yoakum.
I just want to clarify that these were just in brainstorming conversations with PTSA, that no one's actually requesting that. We're trying to find ways of how can, and it's not just PTSA, right? It's just, in that brainstorming, how can community be informed of what is coming up, right? And so I like the ideas that have been discussed here. And yes, I see the challenges of trying to do something really far ahead, but I really like having that attached to the recap. So I just want to clarify that.
I'm also debating, so the board receives the monitoring reports 97% of the time, 10 days prior to the meeting. We don't publish our board meetings until the Friday before. I'm just trying to think, is there a way, is it feasible for us to publish our draft report prior?
Director Liberty?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, obviously, but I'll still chime in. I would assume probably, right? Probably feasible, but and would that meaningfully, if the interest is increasing, trying to increase community engagement, would that meaningfully increase community engagement? My guess is no. Having the draft report out, I do think if we are trying to get, if the interest is to provide the community with more opportunities to engage in the policy work of the board, I do think it's watching a presentation where staff puts words and story to an otherwise fairly dry report most of the time, some of the time, once in a while. I think that would be the more likely trigger as opposed to giving it to people 7, 8 days earlier. I don't think that's, and I do know, and I also know that sometimes the draft, there is a change between the draft and the final.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't, the juice is maybe not worth the squeeze on that one. I was trying to remember what you were saying too, yeah.
Director Richter.
I just want to back Director Laliberty up on that. I agree.
All right. Okay. So another thing I'll throw out is around student engagement, and if there are, and this could be more of a follow-up conversation, or maybe just sort of alerting you that this is something that we're thinking about. But are there any specific places that we're seeing in this shell of a work plan where student engagement would be especially beneficial, or where our students have some sort of special interest, or is this something where kind of sitting with this for a little bit now that it's put together, and coming back at a future board meeting might be more helpful for that process, or even waiting until we've got our new student reps identified and onboarded? Just wanted to throw that out there for conversation. Yes, Director Richter.
Just clarifying question. Do you mean student engagement like our student board reps did this year, that process, or do you mean something else?
Open-ended, but I think something along those lines, or I think we got a tremendous amount of value. The entire board, including our student reps, got a lot of value out of the engagement around OE10. So, and I think also just continuing to sort of turn the dial on the amount of student engagement we have in general. So yes, it could look like a specific topic to sort of to do engagement around. It could also just look like how can we just increase the amount of student voice that we have in board meetings in general, or some combination of the two. Again, very open-ended for discussion right now. Director Richter.
I mean, if the student reps did OE10 last year, OE11 seems like the logical choice, just because one is our classroom and the other is the instructional program, and who is closer to that, I suppose, than our staff, than the people who are learning it. So that's my thought.
James.
I think that's a great idea. I really enjoyed the OE10 process. I think even off the top of my head, OE14, maybe technology, could be done by students. I think it'd be redundant to do OE10 every year, even though, maybe that would, like OE10 is the student one. In terms of how I personally think we could increase student voice, I recently talked with someone on, very brief conversation with someone on the green team about how they, from my school, how they came and presented to the board that one time. And it's a nerve-wracking process. It's really hard to reach the board or anybody in the district, because either you send an email to someone who's very important, or you have to come up in front of the whole entire board and the superintendent and, present something. And it takes a lot of strength and, I would say, bravery. So I think finding a way to make that process of getting information to the board from students is key. The way to do that, I don't know. I think every year we bring up something new, and it's hard to implement, because at the end of the day, I think when you take parents in the school district, they're a lot more outspoken than students naturally, because I think students have more to. I think it's just harder for students to speak up rather than parents, because parents are the ones that vote. Parents don't have money. They have parent-teacher conferences. They're typically more like voice their opinion for the student. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, I think we need to encourage students to voice for themselves, but I think fundamentally it's hard. So I don't know what to do, because I think with everything that's on a board agenda, it's mainly has to concern, like, if we do monitoring, like, what can a student just, if you pick a random student, what would they say to the monitoring? And I think what they would say is, I don't even know what monitoring is. Like, what is that? Like, what do you want me to say? So I think maybe we could somehow include them, especially in the OE10 monitoring report, is what I would say, is maybe get some student input specifically on that one. Maybe we don't have to do it for like OE12, but for OE10, I think specifically that would be helpful if we got some sort of feedback, some sort of engagement with the students during that monitoring report process.
I agree. I think, like James said, like, usually every year we end up coming back to like some form of social media or something like that, which definitely has a lot of restrictions. I know we were talking about maybe a form of social media where students can send in their concerns, but we don't necessarily respond, or we just say like, oh, thank you for sending in your concerns. We can bring this up to the board. I think another thing we could do is we could turn off like messaging, and at least student reps could post like, oh, today at the board meeting, this is what's going to be discussed. Like, if you have thoughts on this, like, come to the board meeting tonight, or contact this person, or send in a written public comment if you can't attend, something like that. But yeah, I think the biggest thing that we've identified over the past 2 years is just that students feel there's very like high barriers to entry, I guess, in getting their opinion out there. And then when you do get your opinion out there, there's not really a feedback loop in terms of, what's coming of that. So I think social media would kind of lower those barriers to entry maybe. And then the feedback loop would just be closed by being more communicative with students about what came of their, comment, more than just like an email after saying, oh, this is who you can talk to or something like that, but to show that we actually value their opinions.
Director Yocum.
Thank you for that input. I kind of look at student engagement almost two paths, and had a conversation today with President Guthrie about this. And I think the work of student engagement, what that was done this year, was around OEs. And I feel like that it benefits the board, but I also really think it benefits the staff to go through that experience. I think doing something similar to that, potentially OE14, I like that idea, or whatever staff has input as well of, what would you like to hear from students? The other piece that we have talked about, Director Meekhoff and I have talked about, is our OGP, the operational governance policy around student representatives to the board, and having our student reps focus on trying to figure out this policy, but not so much the policy, but more of the procedures of how what does a student board, what does this program actually look like? And for that, we've talked about, after reading 100 some student board rep applications, which were all incredible. It is looking at, I think for you are tasked with representing a side of the district, each side of the district, and that's really hard. I think you can come with input from your schools, but I think it's hard to reach out to other schools. So is it kind of looking at some of these students who maybe are not selected as student board reps, where we kind of form an advisory of 2 students from every school that meet with our student board reps and board directors once a month to kind of hit on some of these topics that they can be tasked with gathering information, whether it's not so much a structured student engagement, but as a way to help us kind of brainstorm what the student board rep program looks like going forward. And then more of that, I might call it more of like the formalized student engagement around some sort of OE that we deem potentially a good path to go next year. So almost 2 routes of student engagement that involve our student board reps. And and reaching out, one going into schools and one having a select group that is tasked with gathering information from their schools. That's sort of our thought to throw out there, either discuss now or later.
Suniri.
I agree with both those ideas. I think they're really good, but I do think maybe a bigger problem right now is just that, like, there's no way you can possibly funnel, like, the opinions of everyone, even within, like, one grade at a school, let alone an entire school, into, like, 2 people, right? So I think the maybe more impactful goal should be, like, making it so every student, when they do have an opinion, can effectively, like, either directly reach the board or has some way of ensuring their voice was heard without, having to go through an advisory committee, which then goes to a student rep, which then goes to a board director. Because I think that is what some of the fatigue is right now, is that you, like, essentially are just forwarding your opinion to the next person and not really hearing anything back. So while I think, it would be really good to engage, like, the other students that submitted applications, like James and I were reading through the applications, there are definitely a lot of passionate students. I think also at a lower level, creating some sort of avenue for students to voice their opinion would probably be good, like without having some formalized position, but like a one-off thing.
I think some of what I'm hearing is we don't even really know the answer to my initial question of, like, what would be a good thing, thinking broadly, not just about our student reps, but about our students broadly, where would their input be most valuable? And so sort of step one is establishing those listening channels. I will throw out that one area just generally where we've seen a lot of student engagement is around sustainability. And so thinking about whether we want to build on that, and this may transition too into policy focuses for the board in general, of knowing sort of that we're at a unique point with OE9, where we now have a plan, a written plan, which is what a lot of the board's indicators are written around. In other words, many of the indicators for OE9 are essentially the district will have a written plan for XYZ. And is that an area where we think that there could be some adult board policy work, and students could come alongside that, in addition to just continuing to develop these listening systems? I think it's something that I'm hearing really, really clearly, is so that ideally when we're coming back here next May, we have a better idea of where we could engage students. So I may be muddling things here again, but I just wanted to toss that out as well. Director Meekhoff.
I don't think you're muddling anything. I think this sounds similar to the conversations that we've been having, because in such a large district, finding ways to adequately elevate student voice is really, really hard. And so we have these ideas and then, oh wait, but what about this? And kind of spinning our wheels a little bit. But I do think we should think about, the applications that we read, rather than just, no, we're going to select these 2 and then move on. Finding ways to utilize that passion in students. I hear what you're saying in terms of, like, the channel. That does get pretty silly. But I'm going to sit on this a little bit, because I think that there are ways that we can use that. And I just lost my train of thought. There was something else. It will come to me. I'm back. I think social media, I've been looking around at what other districts are doing in terms of even one-way communication, like what you're saying, Suniri, like YouTube Shorts, or Instagram, where comments are turned off. But I think ways that you can reach students and let them know how they can participate directly, like what you're saying, I think would be really valuable.
Suniri.
Sorry, last thing. I was just going to say, I know a lot of clubs like that operate at a state level, but then also like a school level or a regional level. What they do is something called school visits, where they'll have state officers, or I think like board members do it as well, but they'll have state officers go to meet with like officers of a school or a certain chapter or a certain region, right? And then that way, like, they get to know those people and they can collaborate, but also, you know, it's like built-in time, I guess, to go visit those schools. I think as student board reps, we kind of had school visits this year in the sense that we had listening sessions, but they were very targeted questions for sure. And then also, it wasn't really like necessarily representative of the entire school. Like, we did select a certain student profile. So maybe having student board reps do school visits with ASBs of schools might be a way to, like, I guess, put feelers out there for opinions and things like that. And then ASBs can connect student board reps or the advisory council with certain students that they know may have something that they want to say.
Director Yoakum.
I'm gonna try and go back to your question, and I think one of the things I would like to see student engagement on is rewriting our student board rep policy. And then I do believe having some student engagement around an OE. I don't know which one that is, but I think getting feedback from staff of what would also be beneficial for them, not just us, would be good to hear. Like, I think of those two things. Sorry, I don't know if we choose one or the other or have different avenues of fulfilling those, but for me, that's sort of an interest.
Okay, so I think we've got some things to poke on around student engagement. I'm hearing, yes, how do we sort of establish better listening systems or continue to get better about that? You know, I will throw out just the capacity concern that always I think is important to throw out when it comes to this area, because I think we could certainly ask many, many hours of our students and of staff and board members supporting, and just being respectful that this is really important work and just part of what we do. So keeping that in mind. And then, yes, looking at policies where that input would be helpful. And I kind of, in my notes that I jotted down, I flipped these two items, but this may be a good segue again into, typically, like, since I've joined the board at least, we've always had some sort of overarching policy focus for the year. So my first year, it was OE3, and then we moved into, we've spent like 2 years on OE10 now. And we're hopefully wrapping up OE10 or getting it to policies are never actually set in stone, but at least getting to a point where we can remove draft from things. That would be a good place to get to. Is there something else that we're interested in picking up? Are there any policies that are sort of screaming for a deeper review than what we've done, or sort of what we're doing as we go, right? So like we just did some work around OE4, for example, where we spent a little bit of time. There was some updated policy language, interpretation indicators that we looked at, as sort of over, I think, 2 meetings total. But a policy focus usually sort of spans the whole year. And is there something that we're interested in looking at for that sort of work, or do we not want to do that, which is understandable too, because it is it's a heavy lift on everybody. It's a heavy lift on staff for sure. It's a heavy lift on the board. A lot of time to put in, so it's not something we should do just because I don't know, it's time or something. It's more is there something where we really want to dive in a little bit more or a lot more? Director Richter.
My thoughts after having both this year with OE10 and then having watched a couple of years just from the outside. There have been many years of really good effort put into a lot of our policies, and I don't think anything is screaming that this needs updating drastically. We have a lot of things that are in a reasonable place. I think that there is some danger where if we say we have to go a deep dive on one of them, that we're just making small fiddly changes where it's the 95% good enough, we're good, we can go forward. I do think that with budget and legislative things from Washington and any boundary process we do next year, there's going to be a lot going on. And then I remember the past 3 years and one of our extended study sessions, like we keep talking about communication from the board to community and how we want to do that. And so maybe that is not the OEs, but this meta focus would be my vote on communicating with community and getting their feedback and figuring out our listening sessions. That's my vote.
Director Liberty.
So I could, if pressed, identify like I could name some policy work we could do this year and really focus on that. I agree with Director Richter. What I think I heard Director Richter say that there's already a lot that we have that's likely to take up the board's time. There's work. Yeah, I agree. Also, like on like a board, like the board doing work on like how we as a board communicate. That's not OE work. That's board work, or it's different board policy work. I think that is, for me, that's a higher priority than for example, picking up like OE 11 and spending a lot of time on that. And yes, so all that to say, yes, we could identify. I guess I just did OE 11 is what I would, but I don't think we should. That should be a focus this year.
I think that's reasonable and actually dovetails really nicely with the student conversation of thinking about how adult board members better engage the community and how student board reps also better engage the community. And also ties back to some of the conversations we had around our board self-assessment and really wanting to focus in that area, which we, I think, have said every year that I've been on the board too, but maybe this is the year to step back a little bit from having policy be the focus and really focus on the community engagement piece.
Yeah.
Director Yocum.
I agree with all of this, and I don't know if any of this fits into like our governing culture or our OGP. So essentially, like we could be looking at policy work, but it's our policies versus OEs and ours. And I would love that. That's what I wanted to do for many years. So I am all on board for that.
That's what I just wrote down as well. Because I've heard the board talk about, like, there's some potential updates to those policies. It's a relatively new board. So, yeah.
Yes, and I could see that flowing through, for example, like we'd tossed around the idea for OE10 of having a study session, like we come here on Monday night at 5 o'clock, but then having us, like go to different rooms and talk to community members or something like that. And not having, being able to dedicate study sessions to something like that versus to specific policy work would be, those are the sorts of things that we could work on in the work plan if we weren't, planning, 4 to 5 different discussions around one specific policy. Director Liberty, do you have something to add? No?
Nope. Just nod.
Okay. All right. One more thing. Well, maybe not one more thing, but another thing I'll toss out. Again, from conversations that we've had over the years, and this is not directly to the work plan, but more to meeting structure. So the end of meeting agenda items, right? So we kind of get through the content of the meeting, and then we always have our standing agenda items of superintendent report, and then community affairs and committee updates. Just for some history, which Director Liberty can correct me on if I get wrong here, but I believe that used to just be board member comments, which was sort of or after the superintendent report, of course, just time for board members or student reps to talk.
Open mic night.
Open mic night, yes. And then around the time I joined the board, which is why I don't know all the history, but it was changed to the current format, and the idea being that rather than open mic night, like there were some specific things that were helpful to talk about during board member comments, and sort of putting a little bit more structure to what that should look like. And I just wanted to bring that history into the room, because I know we've had questions about, well, you know, why don't we have board member comments? And so thinking about those agenda items, I have a curiosity. I'll say I feel like anything I would say in a board member comment is already covered by those two agenda items, or anything productive, let's say, that I would say in a board member comment is well covered. But are there places where board members feel like I'm doing something that's board related or that's relevant to the board, and there's not a time in the meeting to talk about that? And same for students, because I would say, and anybody can shoot me down if I'm wrong, but students would be able to, like, if you had something that you were doing related to one of those topics, it's board, which includes our student reps, who can speak during that time. That does bring up the logistical challenge that it is very late in the meeting, often very late in the evening, time-wise. And so a lot of times, you know, y'all have homework or other things to work on, and are not actually present. So again, a couple thoughts here, and I'll say I'm really bringing this up for comment, but the current structure is working pretty well for me. But we could consider moving any of those items earlier in the board meeting, which would have the benefit of our students being there. Also, generally, I think more people are watching early in the meeting. So, you know, if they immediately followed public comment, for example, that would be a different feel to our board meetings. And also, is there any sort of redefinition or expansion that we need to do? Like I said, are there things that aren't covered by those agenda items? I don't think going back to open mic night would serve the board's interest, but if there are important things that we don't feel like we're able to bring into a meeting in the current structure, I think now would be a good time to talk about that. Director Richter.
I'll go first, since I've asked you a lot of questions about this one-on-one. And my question had always been, I go out in the community and I am at some event, and it's not necessarily board work. It's not a school event, but maybe I'm there and I end up talking to people as a member of this board. And the conversation we had rather informally was that, yes, it's okay to bring some of that if it really relates to our work. I could see open mic nights still being a bad idea, just as a policy moving forward, just in case. So that would be my interest, is being able to speak in a box in the agenda that's for community updates, and just being able to bring things that I feel are important that the rest of you should know about, rather than a soapbox.
I think that last part's really, sorry, John Noor. He told me to do this last meeting. Into the microphone, son, is what he said. I think that last part's really important. Like, what I've liked about this change, and when the board is really disciplined about it too, is like when when the conversation at the end it's connected to the work of the board. It's not just sharing, I heard this at QFC, but I heard this at QFC, and, you know, connected to coming up in the next meeting is O11, and this is relevant to that. I want to bring this into the room for that reason. So like that's the, I think, like, just that's just like a us thing. Like, the people who are on the board have to be, disciplined about about what we share. And so I would not expand the scope of it at all. And I would just also encourage everyone, including myself, and to be, thoughtful and mindful about the words we say at the meeting, even at 10:30 p.m. at a meeting.
Director Yoakum.
I'm going to switch to the end of that at 10:30. I am wondering if there's I would like to talk through potentially pros and cons of doing this earlier. I think when you do have a room full of people in attendance, or I don't know if I understand the purpose of doing comments immediately so people can come in, comment, and leave. I also see a benefit of those who are in attendance hearing something from the superintendent, a report that maybe they're receiving new information and it helps them better understand, maybe going forward with what's happening with the meeting, or centered around what maybe a bulk of the comments are, or who knows, right? And also wondering if that's an opportunity for us for community then present to hear our updates on like what committees actually exist here. Would it help improve like I want to be on that committee, if there are people in that room listening, hearing. So I'm just wondering if is there pros and cons to doing it earlier versus later, before comment, after public comment? I would be interested in having that conversation. And I obviously need more of the history from that because I've just been observing this one way.
Director Richter.
Everything Director Yoakum just said, with the addition of, if we do it earlier, our student reps can also chime in.
Director Liberty.
So a potential con, or maybe it's a pro. It's just, I don't know, it could be both. We're all much more verbose at the beginning of a meeting than we are at the end. I am intentionally concise at the end, particularly when it's a long meeting. So it's just, so it would, having that earlier would, I think, elongate some of the reports that the board gives. One, pro and con, I think. Two, it would obviously shift other things further back too. So we would, potentially be having monitoring presentations even later at night in that scenario. So, and another pro, I think you had correctly identified that if particularly for committee updates, I think an interest we all have for the committees that we sit and observe on is for there to be participation in those, and for there to be participation, people have to know about it and be interested about it. And having that highlighted at the beginning of the meeting, I think would help. I think that's a great idea.
Director Richter.
Just thinking out loud here, but we often have public comment and then we invite people to stay, and a lot of the times they don't. My guess is that the average community member who has come to give a comment is less interested in what seems like dry monitoring work that is relatively untethered to what they're thinking of. Whereas if we went straight into what the superintendent has to say, that might really pique people's interest and keep them around. I think I'm just repeating what's been said, but I could see that being more interesting for our average public commenter. I don't know.
I was going to speak to one of the cons. This is just speaking for me. I have all my updates written, so it's going to be the same time beginning or end, and I may speak a little faster at the beginning than I would at the end. Just a little 2 cents.
Dr. Holman.
So a couple things. One, we added a agenda item, the legislative update this year, and I'd just like the board's feedback. Is that a standing agenda item that you want to keep? Did it meet the board's interests? And is there anything you would want different from that agenda item?
Yeah, so when we added it this year, we explicitly added it at the beginning because of this exact conversation of, is this something that we want to bury at the end of the meeting? No, we want this up front. So great question. Yeah, Director Meekhoff.
That has been really helpful to me, so I would love to keep that. I think I've been quiet because this is the only meeting structure I've known, and so I want to be thoughtful about, I think everyone's brought up the pros and the cons. I like the idea of student participation. I like the idea of having content close to public comment that might be more interesting or enticing to people. I'm wondering how they would know that, because we say at the end of public comment, should you choose to leave, like making sure that people are aware of what's coming so that they aren't just continuing to leave like they do now without, because I don't know that now they know that what's coming next.
Director Liberty.
The legislative update presentations, both in content and in timing on the agenda, have worked well for me. I find them very useful, engaging, and I think it's helpful. As a board member, I like that we are at the beginning, near the beginning of our meeting, telling the community, providing that update to the community as well. So I think it's been a great change. I would continue it. And the last thing we were discussing on the timing of committee updates or community fairs, my view is we should keep those at the end of the meeting, because I prioritize the board monitoring work, I guess, over those agenda items. And for me, that having those earlier in the agenda, I think leads to better conversation. So, and that's at the cost of having the other stuff later. I mean, just something's got to be last.
Director Yoakum.
Yeah, for the legislative updates, I've really appreciated that, and I appreciate the continuation of the PowerPoint and kind of adding on. I wish I would have provided more updates. I think I viewed it as it is Barbara or me speaking, and I think I just needed to view that as we both can speak at that time. And it was like, oh, you're going, I don't need to. So I think that is just one change I would maybe want to make, especially, attending, I think it's now the Advocacy Action Network, AAN, with WASDA. So that is a monthly meeting. So to be able to come in, as ledge rep, to come in and provide like, hey, this is what is actually happening. So I think prioritizing that in ledge updates is important moving forward. So that would be my only input on that.
Just to be clear, just making sure it's clear that it's a board and a staff update.
Exactly. I think as ledge rep, I think I viewed it as like, Barbara has it. We're good. Yeah, exactly. I think it's staff and board. Yeah. And I think I did not view it that way, and that is on me. So I think moving forward, just knowing that both can or don't need to at that time provide an update.
And so maybe that's just for the script, making sure that the president calls out both staff and board. Great. My other question was timing of meetings, both duration of meeting and when we start meetings. And so there are some districts, they start their study sessions at 3:00, so that their board meetings are starting a little bit earlier. So we've talked about it over the years, and we've never changed it. And so I'm just putting it out there for the board to consider and reject.
Director Liberty.
I wish that we could. I think I'll just think you would have 4 board members at some of the meetings. I cannot be here that early on most days. It would be a challenge. And I think that doing that risks making this even an even more difficult position for people, for a lot of people to hold. So if we're thinking about, when we should always be thinking about like attracting future board people, make it easier for people to be on the board as opposed to harder. So I don't think we should do that. I think it's a conversation worth having. Can I say one more thing on this? Or I was going to shift just a little bit on the. We have in the past, we did it just recently again. Started the board meeting earlier at 5 p.m. And we had done that, I think maybe 6 years ago or somewhere in there. That was something we did from time to time. I thought that, that ended up being a long meeting. We had a lot on the agenda, and I thought it was time well spent. Like it was a good meeting. It was a productive meeting. I thought that was useful. So I think, I don't know if that's. The wonder I have is that should that be like a model that we shift to of intentionally doing that more often, or just sort of fitting it in when it makes sense agenda wise. So I'm curious if anyone else had any thoughts on that. So I actually thought that worked fairly well.
I'll just give a brief history of, we used to have one long board meeting and one long study session per month, and they would flip. And so the board would do a business meeting at 5 o'clock just to, consent agenda, just to keep operations moving. It was about 30 minutes, and then we'd move right into a study session. And then we'd have, the one meeting a month where it was a, 5 p.m. study session, 7 p.m. board meeting. We didn't have public comment at that. The short board meeting, the earlier longer study session a lot of times lent itself to bringing in outside groups a little bit more because it was on the tail end of the meeting rather than at the beginning of the two meetings. So it's just, that was something we did for quite a long time.
Can I say one thing on that? When I was on the board when we did that, the board then did not spend as much time on monitoring as the board does now. And so I think that would be a real challenge to shift to that back to that model. In fact, I think it's impossible now with how much time the board spends I think rightly in business meetings monitoring policy. So,
I'm just providing history, not a suggestion.
I didn't mean to attack you.
I did not feel attacked.
I will say on an earlier board meeting, I agree with Director Liberty. When I was working full time, it was hard enough to get here by 5 o'clock, never mind earlier. And now that I'm not, at least working around elementary school pickups, I could not do a 3 o'clock board meeting on a regular basis because my kid gets out of school at 3:15, and that's in the earlier shift, right? Some are in school till 4 o'clock, or almost 4 o'clock. So thinking about future board members and what sorts of commitments they might have, I don't know how much earlier we could push things. And yeah, I did find it interesting that when we had an early board meeting only, we were still here past 9 o'clock. Like great conversations. I think it when it starts to creep to 9:30, 10 o'clock, that is somewhat of a forcing function of just like, we all get to the point where we're like, we're like just clearly not thinking clearly at this point, which is good because, we shouldn't, like, there's a reason that we're not having board meetings every night or what have you. So yeah, I would be concerned that we would move it earlier and then still be here past 10 o'clock a lot of the times because, as Director Liberty pointed out earlier, the time kind of, the work expands to fit the time allotted. Yes, Director Richter.
I'll also point out that now we have student board reps and they probably don't get out of school until after 3, right? Or right around 3.
Yeah, like my school ends at 3:15.
3:15, yeah. So. Plus, I appreciate everything Director Liberty said about difficulty getting here, and it would not work for me very well.
I think it does. This segues potentially into, as long as we're throwing out crazy ideas here or just thoughts so we have to have board meetings. That's probably obvious. There are things that the board, either by law or by our own policies, is required to do and take action on, and so on. Study sessions we do not have to have. And so thinking about to be clear, where I'm going with this is not let's get rid of study sessions, but what should we be thinking about in terms of the value that we're getting out of study sessions, or what do we hope to accomplish? Because the business meetings of the board are the board's meetings too, but study sessions are really our meetings, and so what is the most productive use of this time, which might also feed into. I mean, if we're all like, well, study sessions are clearly useless, then that actually sort of points in a different direction in terms of structuring things. Again, I don't think that's the case, or I would argue strongly that I get value out of study sessions, to be clear. But what is the best use of that time for each of us, if kind of under the assumption that will continue to be part of our calendar? Are there, I don't know if there's any thoughts on that, especially as we're starting to put together the work plan, which is the point of this conversation, thinking about what are the highest value items, highest leverage items to put into those study session slots. Director Meekhoff.
I think I really appreciated just some of the deep dives. I think the sustainability presentation was really meaningful to me. And like Dr. Holman mentioned, I would love to see, and it is trickier with the 5 o'clock, time slot, but in terms of outside organizations coming in, and I think that there's a lot more work we can do on collaborating or partnering, and better making connections, and that study sessions could be a place to do that.
Director Yocum.
Yeah, I don't have specific topics, but I think just even this evening, the structure of this tonight, of the conversation that we're having and be able to feed off of each other's ideas, like this has been really helpful. And if that's something that's a specific topic with that includes a presentation, if there's opportunity for us to engage more with whoever is presenting, to treat it really like a two-way communication where we are receiving information, and is there opportunities for us to not just ask questions but feedback, like how do we, I guess, model more of the engagement that we want, through the organization and in our classrooms and with staff. So it's not so much the topics, but more of how does this structure become meaningful for everyone in this room, and not just the 7 of us.
Director Liberty.
The study sessions are most useful for me when we're having conversation and engaging on the board on the work of the board. They're less than that when it's honestly when we're receiving like a program update in this meeting. I know that's I had to say that. I know that other people have different views. So having outside organizations come in and present to the board in this context would be less useful to me than having conversations in the board in this setting on work that we're doing as a board. So.
Director Meekhoff.
To be clear, I think what I meant is like having those conversations, because I think a struggle I have had just transparently as a new board director is sometimes sitting pretty quietly from like 5 to 10, in terms of being presented to. And I think the more we can engage, the more useful that is for me.
James.
A little bit unrelated, but I had a thought about social media and how we use that to connect to constituents. I think the reason why social media at a state or a federal level for government works really well to like reach a broad audience is because it's like controversial. It's like, how do I say this? Like, it's partisan. So naturally, I think on social media, you need that sort of like eye-catching ability to get views. I don't know what we would post that would be that eye-catching to get a lot of views is what I'm trying to say. Because when I think about like what I see on social media that's related to politics is like an oversight committee, like Congress, like interview, not, you know, like asking questions to various federal agencies. Like we don't have that like level of pop that when I look at not only our Instagram pages or other school districts' Instagram pages, they don't get that many views. So I think it's still a good avenue to pursue, but that's just what popped into my head.
I'm really glad we're not modeling our governance process after oversight committee hearings.
So
Do we have subpoena power?
one thing I'll throw out too, because I think a common thread, even though it might look different, but between what all three of you were saying was around sort of the engagement at study sessions, and like that being the highest value, which is which I would agree with, and that's helpful in thinking about sort of how we might want to plan those going forward. I'll also throw out, and this is maybe just something to think about, or we don't have to make decisions right now. But I think also historically, I remember when I first started engaging with the board as a constituent, study sessions were not recorded. And that's I believe still not a requirement. Am I correct? Yes, that study sessions be recorded. It's if the board is taking action, it needs to be recorded.
Board meetings and special meetings are required. The board's policies allow the board to record and publish study sessions, but it doesn't require it.
Yeah, and nor does state law, because we would definitely not want to be afoul of that. But and I can see again sort of pros and cons to recording. I know for me it was hard to. If there was a topic I was interested in at a study session as a community member, to know that I had to come into this room to hear that if I wanted to listen to that conversation. And I do think it can just be challenging knowing that all of my ramblings are being recorded, and yes, seeing myself up there on the screen and all of those things, and that can also just take away from having open and honest conversations here. To be clear, the meeting, of course, would still be open, would still be announced, and all of that. But yeah, is that and that was a change that was made at some point, which Director Liberty could maybe fill in the details there, and it's something that this board could decide to change with those pros and cons in mind.
Can I clarify something you said? You said can allow us to have more open and honest meetings. I think one of the challenges with study sessions isn't that whether it's recorded or it's not, the board is open and honest. It's an opportunity to dialogue, and at times when you're dialoguing, you're trying things out, you're throwing out ideas, you're brainstorming, and those brainstorms aren't always eloquent, nor are they always correct and accurate, nor are they the idea that we move forward with. And to have that documented forever can cause board members, superintendents, staff to maybe not be as creative in the moment. So that was the hesitancy that some board members and the superintendent offered as that decision was made to do this. And it was required during COVID. Like that's a reality. Like we were required anytime we had a open public meeting. And I believe that's why we went away from doing study sessions, and we just had board meetings, and we had study session topics on board meetings. It was all remote, and I was alone in the boardroom and everybody else was at home. You know, I mean, so it didn't really matter what we called it, and so we just had board meetings. And then that translated into study sessions being recorded and live broadcast.
Director Yocum.
I appreciate them being recorded. I think there's the transparency of what we are doing. And I think for a community to be able to go back and, you know, we were just talking about like the high cap presentation to like, oh, what was that? And go back and watch and listen to some of the information that was provided and not just on a presentation on a slide deck. But I also really do appreciate in the study sessions where we have an opportunity to get up and go and write on the board. So I almost feel like there's a good combination in kind of maybe how the study sessions are structured to allow for both opportunities, where there is that presentation and then it's still being recorded, but we are doing that dialogue. We are engaging up and around with each other and coming back and kind of summarizing what were some of those takeaways that we had for the community who may want to chime in. So I like the idea of both because I see value in both of those.
Did you have something to say?
It's on the study session being recorded.
You go.
I would also just offer, if the board is thinking about more community groups engagement in study sessions, to just be mindful that there could be some community groups that it's in everybody's best interest not to have it publicly recorded. You may be asking for feedback. You may be asking questions that are of a pseudo-personal nature, and folks may or may not be willing to engage in that way. And so just being mindful of that, knowing that I think there's really legitimate reasons not to record. I think I've grown accustomed to it now that we do this. And so I was hesitant at first, and I think the board does a very nice job of dialoguing and being authentic, even as, you know, it's being documented and recorded. But just want to put that out there, that in engagement, that could be something that intentionally a decision is made not to broadcast and record.
Director Meekhoff?
I was actually thinking about that same thing and how this feels coming in, that it feels different too when it's recorded. If someone is coming in to present, that I think it shifts things a little bit. I stand in my truth that I called Director Richter a doctor. I'm glad it's documented. So that doesn't bother me as much, but I understand how it could, and it could lead to not having like as much of an organic conversation in terms of just being able to brainstorm and have the space for that.
Sorry, Director Liberty.
That's okay. So the last time we had a conversation about this, it was not recorded because it was during a interim phase when it was not recorded. I too have grown, I don't know if accustomed is the right word. Maybe I care less about it, something like that. But even now, like as I was thinking about this, like I was like, well, I got to choose my words a little more carefully than the last time we had this conversation. Not to say that I'll just be honest. Like I think that it's detrimental to have our study sessions recorded. I think that the negatives to it outweigh the pros. I think there are pros. I think having everyone be able to view it later and access it both at the time and later is a real big benefit. It's beneficial for me when I missed a meeting to be able to go back and watch the study session. And I know that it's beneficial for some members of the community to be able to view that recording later. And I know that having it recorded does, I'm certain it inhibits the dialogue. To what degree? It's hard. I can't quantify that, but I know that it does. And I think that I think our study session meetings would be better if they were not recorded. If the default was they were not recorded. And I'm just looking at our policy now, which is study sessions may be broadcast or recorded. We and the default is that we do record and broadcast them. I think it would be better to switch to the default is that they are not, and that from time to time, I don't know, we'd have to think about, we probably have to tweak, maybe think about how we'd think about when do we flip the switch on and off and be thoughtful about that. But I think that I think we'd be better to shift to not recording as the default.
Any last thoughts on any of this?
Just leave me on the island.
All right. So I think next steps is to take some of this feedback. Thank you for walking through this and for the engagement, the open conversations. Because yes, we always have open conversations. Thank you for that clarification, Dr. Holman. Every now and then he just saves me from myself. Yes, so thank you for the conversation. I think this is really helpful for starting to just map out what this could look like. As I said, I think just to summarize some of those key takeaways is to play around as we're building out a work plan with spreading things over 3 meetings rather than 2, and bringing that back for the board to say, oh yeah, that seems like it would be an interesting thing to try, or no, whoa, this is just way too much now. Not having a specific policy focus, so not building in study sessions on OEX, but really thinking more about adding some things around board community engagement, to be clear, and that being different from district community engagement, because that's something that is already covered or is already being worked on. And having that include thinking about what student engagement specifically looks like. And I think we, well, I don't know if we landed on consensus. I guess we can bring that back too of the, because we don't actually have to build that into the work plan at this time, but maybe thinking a little bit more on the end of meeting items. I think we've heard some opinions or I think some board directors are interested in moving it earlier, trying that, and then others are interested in keeping that at the end. So I think we can reflect on that a little bit more. We don't need to make that decision tonight. Anything else that I missed? Director Yoakum.
I just want to say thank you for leading us through this. This has been really beneficial. I really appreciate how this process of kind of discussing what the annual work plan looks like is a starting off point. So just thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's good. I didn't know how it was going to go. So thank you for engaging and saving me, because it would have been really awkward to throw out things and have people just stare at me. All right. Since there are no further agenda items, the May the 4th, 2026 study session is now adjourned at 6:39 p.m.